Haha, we are live. How cool is that? Well, that was a little more challenging than Facebook Live. And I have no idea what, what I'm really looking at yet, although there is a sidebar. I can type something in. Aloha. Anybody there? Concurrent viewers. Well, so this is a test of YouTube Live, first time on streaming. I've installed OBS software in the computer to make that connection. Apparently it's working. And concurrent viewers, 1. Ah, does that mean somebody else is watching? Okay, yes. Well, I'll be getting this all hooked up and figuring out how it works. And then probably have somebody to talk to. I guess maybe there's someone out there. It says concurrent viewers 1. If there's somebody there actually watching, could you do me a favor and type something into the chat box? This is my first time trying to make this happen on YouTube. It does show 1. Okay, well, I welcome, and I'll be on here once I get this figured out, doing some live streams, YouTube, Facebook, and be talking about healing and science and really focusing on nature and self-healing, the natural process of healing, which our body is always doing. And typically, other than one test in 37 years, I found there was a horse that I tested that absolutely had nothing it needed to optimize its healing process. It was healthy, prize stallion on my brother's farm. And it was actually a double-blind test, a masked test, a controlled test, because it had a sample of this horse's hair and a sample of another horse's hair that was a sick horse on the same farm. It was being tested by my brother's wife, who was a physiatrist, a medical specialist in rehabilitation. So she was testing me to see if I could really tell which horse was healthy and which one was sick. And I did. But that's the only time. I've seen infants that were pretty healthy, that maybe only had one causal layer of stress that they were working on. That was psycho-emotional and responded to flower essences. Some animals also similarly, very simple. I had a dog that we tested and it needed a flower essence combination for psycho-emotional stress that was related to fears around childbirth. So this dog hadn't been able to carry a litter, and it was a show dog. They really wanted to breed it. So we had them check it out. A dog had actually come from Australia, so they had to check back with the source in Australia and say, hey, was there any stress around this this child? People treat dogs like their children often, but this dog's birth time, and sure enough, they got the answer back. Oh, well, actually, this is the only one that survived. The mother died and all the siblings died. Oh. And so this flower essence actually changed the dog's personality, released a lot of stress that it was holding from that traumatic experience at the beginning of its life, and was immediately able to get pregnant and hold to term the litter. So there's information missing that the dog needed to complete its recovery from that trauma. It was still stuck in that trauma in terms of its psyche. So we can be missing information. We can be missing quantum energy. Energy is very specific in its resonance. It's actually how we measure chemistry in the lab, by the fingerprint in the electromagnetic spectrum, the resonances that are specific to different minerals, specific to different functional groups in organic chemistry. which reminds me of the our terrain restore formula. The chemistry in there carries the resonance, because it carries the functional groups of 85% of all drugs that are used. So drugs are kind of little pieces of nature, not extracted from their natural form, modified from their original form, but they're still analogs functionally and energetically of something, some frequency, some functional group in nature, which in the case of soil and the molecules, large, stable, complex molecules formed by soil-based organisms that carry these 85% of the resonances of and functional groups of modern medicine drugs. Well, in this complex form, it carries the resonance, but no toxicity, because it's a large molecule. It doesn't enter the body. It actually signals the body to close the gates, to tighten the tight junctions between cells in the gut. So it's very effective at doing that. It takes about half an hour. So we recommend taking drops half an hour before each meal, and it saves people from the effects of antibiotics in the meats. Commercial meats are loaded with antibiotics. There's actually more antibiotics fed to pigs than to humans, prescribed to humans. It's just in the feed of the pigs. They give them that much. It creates leaky gut, and they put on more toxic weight faster. So it's commercially viable, but it's not great for our health. There's often a big difference between what's commercially viable, what you can make money at, and what's good for anybody. For our spirits, for our bodies. If something's, even if it's good for the body, if it weren't good for the spirit, it's like, that's a contradiction. Like, we don't want to, rob from our spirit to make the body healthy. That's not a good trade-off. Fortunately, when we deal with nature and natural medicine, what's good for the body, it's a healthy body that really provides the vessel, the Holy Grail, for the spirit to inhabit, to embody itself, to be anchored in this life, and to develop and grow. And we develop and grow through those healing processes by facing our missing pieces, our challenges, our roadblocks, and our needs energetically, informationally, and materially, and identifying those, finding those, seeking those out. Our intuition, information from the gut that exceeds the information from the brain to the gut, or from the heart on emotions, and from the future. There's really clear studies now that show the heart responds before stimuli are presented, before it's determined by a random number generator in a computer what stimulus will be presented. So don't think of time as the conventional sense of the arrow of time, one of the great, still unsolved mysteries of philosophy and physics. It's not a forward arrow. It's a cycle. There's a forward and reverse arrow. That's the other way to look at it. Antimatter and matter are reverse time entities of each other. So they have the same identity, but different direction in time. So there's so many sort of dead ends in modern science that we have to break through and go beyond. Some of the older models that are still being taught and believed and supported by modifying our models when things don't fit, and not really ever questioning the basic assumptions that are usually unspoken. Things like the fundamental nature of the universe. If we speak to plasma physicists and electrical engineers, they give us a whole different perspective on the universe and how it works compared to the conventional cosmologists that are, PhD trained in the programs that train in that field. We get different fields of study that each look at the world through a narrow aperture, and they don't study each other's fields. So even within physics, again, cosmologists versus conventional modern cosmologists versus plasma physicists. When's the last time the cosmologist went in the lab and played with plasma? They don't, but there are plasma physicists who are doing that even right now. There's a wonderful research project going on where they're creating an artificial sun a plasmoid, very high energy, and all kinds of probes in there to be able to measure, because plasma is still a bit of a mystery. It's phenomenological. It's observed. The Peratt instabilities. Tony Peratt of Sandia Labs, working for the federal government, and he had observations of what are now called scientifically the Peratt instabilities, instability patterns, shapes, cellular shapes and forms that plasma tends to take as you change energy levels, as different resonance forms. And so this was classified information at the time that other scientists came to him, sociologists, historians, looking at rock art around the world, like here in Hawaii. We have rock art that shows, looks like a human being, kind of. There's like a head and four limbs, and be out like this. But then there's circles. If I can get on screen, there'll be a circle out here to the side, between the arms and the legs. They're kind of angular like this, and it turns out that's a plasma instability, which then explains why people on every continent, every inhabited continent, and all kinds of places and islands and places very diverse, very far from each other, where, as far as we can imagine, there was no human-to-human contact between those cultures at that time. But that why at about the same time in geological history and human history, these different tribes were recording the same types of figures, very similar figures, all around the globe. Well, the answer is they all had the same sky above them, and so they saw these in the heavens at a time cosmologically when the plasma that's always out there that we see as the darkness between the stars. Stars are clearly plasma that's in arc mode, and parts of it in glow mode. So we see it. There's light emission from arc mode plasma, like a lightning bolt that has a lot of light, or a plasma like a flame in a fire that's in glow mode. But plasma that's not in arc mode, not enough energy to be in arc mode, not enough energy to be in glow mode, still carries electrical current and follows the laws of electromagnetism, and it's called dark mode. That's what we see in the heavens, mostly dark mode plasma. And the plasma cosmologists, plasma physicists look at the universe and say, well, it's 99.9% plasma. And then we've got a little bit of, here on Earth, we're in school studying it. They don't talk much about plasma, but there's gas. We breathe in gas, right? And there's liquid. Body's mostly water. It's a liquid. We have water covering much of the surface of the Earth. It's a liquid phase. And then solid phase, the Earth, the crystalline minerals and the bones and proteins in the body. Structural proteins. The densest protein in the body is the lens of the eye. And because it's so dense, it's very sensitive to the local environment of that tissue, especially circulation, because it's an avascular tissue. It has no direct circulation, very dependent on the regional circulation. Very similar to joints. In a way, it's a lot like a joint. The optic nerve involved in glaucoma damage, also a lot like a joint, because you've got an eyeball and you've got a nerve, and when the eye moves, that angle between the nerve and the eye has to change, and you've got connective tissue in there called the lamina cribrosa. It's involved. If there's inflammation in that, it's going to affect the nerve, and that's where most of the damage seems to originate. Broken blood vessels, which maybe other factors, lack of bioflavonoids that would make the vessels more resilient, more flexible and stronger in a flexible way, so they can flex and move without breaking. But also a lack of mercury will help reduce bleeding. One of the big symptoms of mercury is blood, or pus and blood if it's coming out through the skin. So it's all connected. The plasma in the sky was named after the plasma in the body. We have cytoplasm in the cells. We've got the plasma of the blood plasma that's extracellular, versus the cytoplasm is intracellular. We've got ectoplasm in spiritual observations where a ghost materializes into form. It gathers plasma around that body, which I will call a condensate body, a Bose-Einstein condensate being the form of condensate that won the 2001 Nobel Prize for documenting, yes, the physicists Bose and Einstein were correct in predicting that there would be this quantum state, this base quantum state of matter, where all the atoms in an extended object, a macroscopic object, could be in the same quantum state and therefore not localized individually as atoms, but be an energetic sort of pool as a liquid analogy, but rather than discrete atoms that can't be divided, it's a pool that's non-differentiated. So it's a matrix of energy, a pool of energy, a field of energy, a waveform operating as wave rather than as matter. So that's the nature of the spirit body, and it, as a waveform, can move in and out of what they call conventional matter, the solid, liquid, and gas in the body. That's the biological body, but the spirit body inhabits it when we're alive, when we're conscious, and can move out of the body in an out-of-body experience, a near-death experience, or transition in death. So there's a lot that we do know from the last 100 years of research and exploration in healing and medicine, and from spirituality, that we can draw together to really put together a model of health and healing and human life and consciousness and spirit and immortality of the soul that begins to be explanatory and predictive. That's one of the key elements of identifying really a useful model. Is a useful model will not only be explanatory. Every story, every origin story that every tribe tells is explanatory, but how predictive is it of what's going to happen in the future? So when we look at stories of origins around the globe, they're actually quite coherent. They have a different name for Mars, for example, but it's always the god of war, or a different name for Venus, but it's always a comet. Well, we don't see Venus as a comet, except now that we can visualize the magnetotail of Venus, which can actually reach to the Earth. The Earth can pass through the magnetotail, and there are optical visual effects that are visible at some certain times in modern times. But in the distant past, in human memory, it has been, that magnetotail has been quite visible. So there's a tendency for the scientist, the learner, the observer, to make presumptions and assumptions that what I see, what I observe, what I can measure now is how it's always been, because it's always been that way as long as I've been looking. And I've been here the whole time that I've been here. So there's that error, philosophical error of extrapolation, of assumption and presumption, which is fine to assume and presume in order to make an argument, deductive reasoning, but we should not forget what those assumptions are. That's the huge error in consciousness when we, I'm not assuming that, I know, I believe. It becomes a belief, which scientism, the distinction between true science, which is observation, and scientism, which now can only observe that which is believed. It's like, that's not possible, therefore it can't be. A great example is in Australia. Over a series of years, they every summer, this laboratory that was measuring the ionosphere they had their equipment broke down every summer. They'd start getting zeros. Oh, there's not measurement is zero. It's, kick it. Little percussive maintenance on the equipment. No, it doesn't work. And then in the fall it would come. It would start working again. Oh, that's weird. I don't know why. But they'd throw out all that data every year. Throw out the data. And one year they were thinking, well, didn't this happen last year at the same time? And they started looking back at all the thrown out data, and it was coherent in time. It was a seasonal effect because they had a hole in the ozone layer every summer that they ascribed to the instrument because it couldn't possibly be up there. It couldn't be that there was a hole in the ozone layer. Not possible. It wasn't in the bell curve. It's like statistically, no, throw that out. We do it all the time. I mean, it's done all the time in science. I mean, look at the worst case scenario. It's actually legal for drug companies to do all kinds of research on a new compound that's synthetic, that never existed in our genetic history as a separate entity, and that has toxic effects. And they observe all kinds of toxic side effects, and they don't like to report that part of the data because that's not going to sell the drug. And they're investing lots of money in it, and the whole purpose is to make more money back. The purpose is not to heal, or they wouldn't be making drugs. They wouldn't be making synthetic compounds that never existed because there's no rational theory upon which something that's never existed before for our genetics and that's toxic would be healing. The chances are minuscule. So, I mean, it's possible. Sure. Everything didn't exist at one time and then it did. It came into being. So, but things that have been around longer, there's more chance that it's adapted to be conducive to life. And if it comes from another living being, like an herbal extract or a nutrient from a plant, from an animal, or from the natural environment, from seawater that's been around, that we've been exposed to all this time, and our ancestors were, back to the fungi. Human beings are descended from fungi. We're portable real estate. And the term real estate actually means royal estate, if you look at the etymology. We are kings and queens of this little bit of earth that we can port around on the earth and navigate this two-dimensional surface of the earth as we learn to transcend our limitations of our past, the ego, and die to that ego, so that we can expand and open up and make room for our future self, which is trans-dimensional, across time, across space, to be present. Oh, the future self is always willing to be present. That's our guardian angel, or at least one of them, a primary one, potentially. But with the ego, the past, the self as it knows itself from the past up until now, and is trying to survive and control its way through that, the moment into the future, that smaller self has control and has to let go of control and open and actually invite, in a sense. There's the way to sustainably do it, to apply the will, as opposed to applying the will to being in small control. Apply the will to being open to the divine control, the greater control, the control of the future self, which is, by definition, a viable cell in the divine body of all that is. And what we see of all that is an image of all that is. It's not the source itself, but it's an image. It's an expression of that deeper source. Just like we see in physics, every point in space has a non-locality of virtually infinite energy, enough energy that all of the energy that's accessible in the vacuum, which is not a vacuum, it's a plenum, a fullness, not an emptiness. There is no emptiness, there is no vacuum. And the greatest vacuum that we can make on Earth is less of a vacuum than anything in space, but the vacuum in space is still a plasma, even let alone interstellar space, intergalactic space, space in voids between galactic clusters. There's still maybe one ion per couple of cubic meters. It's therefore still a plasma, and operates, moves, and operates according to the laws of electromagnetism. But what else moves along according to those laws? It kind of flipped in reverse of magnetoelectric function is the condensate. So as I see it, the biology of the plasma, the liquid phase of life, and the spiritual function of the condensate, the holy grail of the spirit consciousness, just superconductive, superfluid, has all the quantum dynamic characteristics of a quantum object, and yet it's made of many atoms worth of those transition minerals in their non-metallic state, uh, working together to be able to hold electric current and magnetic fields and frequency and oscillation, basically the software programming of experience of a life and the learning and the wisdom of a life, to be able to hold that indefinitely because of it's super fluid and super conductive. That superconductivity allows for infinite time of sustained memory, of sustained will, of sustained uh, intention. So that's a good test run. Let's say aloha and see you again soon.